So Harry is putting up his slides. And so I will introduce him. We're returning to the near side now. And Harry is going to talk to us about the Rima Bode region as a new landing site, exploration site.
All right, so today I would like to share some thoughts, preliminary thoughts on the Rima Bode region that might be actually an interesting site for studying volcanism on the moon and also as a potential ISRU site. And obviously I'm presenting on behalf of many different people here that I list on the slide here. So what was the motivation and the framework? Well, a couple of months ago, a year ago, ESA issued a call that asked to think about how ESA's large lunar lander can be used for science and research, basically. And that was, of course, in the larger framework of the increased and great interest in returning to the moon by many spacefaring nations. And so we were thinking of basically using this EL3 lander to touch down on the surface and then have a rover basically extending the area of research that can be covered. In an ideal case, this rover would have some night survival capability. It could be operated by humans from the gateway or from Earth. That's still up for decisions. And right now, as is my understanding, that the first EL3 lander will not be sort of targeted to return samples, but one of the next ones will be. So for the moment, we were planning for some in situ observations with the option of sample return. And compared to all the landing sites on the far side and the polar areas, we were thinking of a simple landing site because ESA has never soft landed on the moon so far. Nevertheless, it should have some high scientific potential and basically should help answering multiple questions. And so that limited our search for the near site, where we have direct communication. And of course, the site should be safe. Nevertheless, should have some potential for some excellent science in various fields. And we picked the Rima Bode area. And I just want to point out that this is, of course, nothing specifically new. The Rima Bode constellation site is actually just to the northeast of our landing site. And that site was described by Bode and Richard in great detail in 2018. So just to orient yourself, so we are looking at the near side, central near side. So we're at about 11 degrees north and about 5 degrees west, just southeast of the Imbrium basin. You see the rim structure and sort of situated in between Mare Volporum and Sinus Estum. So the red box is the area of interest. And right away, you can see that this is a particularly interesting site because Copernicus crater is close by, Eratosthenes crater is close by, and the Imbrium is close by. So 3 of the chronostratigraphic time markers are basically contributing material to this particular site. And in addition to that, you see the very, very dark area here, the very low albedo, which was interpreted by Geddes and also by Bode to consist of glassy material, pyroclastic material, dark titanium-rich glass beads, basically. So when we zoom into this area here now, this is the site of interest, and right away you can see that the area is indeed very special because you have this mantling deposit of the pyroclastics on top of some more highland material. You see a beautiful wrinkle ridge that is close by to the east, to the west, and you have a fairly fresh impact crater, Bode C, also in this area. In addition, of course, you have Rima Bode that you can see on the lower right of the image. So if you look into this area, I can see many different things that are interesting. So particularly at one site, you know, the one, we could get access to these pyroclastic deposits. We could drive up this ramp basically and collect material. We have in site 2, we have this fairly fresh impact crater, very blocky, that would give us access to boulders, but it would also allow us to have a pretty good look at this crater wall. At site 3, we have again pyroclastic deposits, but if you look into the composition of these pyroclastic deposits, they appear to be somewhat different at site than the pyroclastics at point 1. At point 4, you see this dome-like structure or cone-like structure, which might well be a volcanic vent. So that's something that is a hypothesis to be tested. At point 5, you could have access to some highland material. At point 6, you see that Copernicus ray material is basically extending towards the east, and so you could sample the Copernicus material there. At point 7, you have access to some unmodified basalts, if you will. And then at site 8, you could cross actually the wrinkle ridge, and with a ground penetrating radar, you can get the structure of there, but you can also sample some Eratosthenes material. I called it ray material here, but what I really mean is that Eratosthenes contributed material from that direction. And then, of course, at point 9, you can drive across the ejecta blanket of Bode Sea crater, and you would get the very nice profile of the underlying substrate, basically, that has been ejected. And so Bode Sea serving as a drill hole would basically be then reflected in the deposition of the ejecta blanket and the composition of the ejecta blanket. So those are a couple of things that I think make this area very interesting. Now, how can you do this? Well, I just put in our landing site sort of in the center somewhat, and then you can see individual traverses to these sites. I also show the distance to the endpoint. So these are all numbers that are fairly within reach, nothing special that we haven't done yet. So I just remind everybody that Luna Cod 2 drove about 39 kilometers and it took about 5 months. Okay, so I think we can do actually faster and better. But on the way, of course, to these final points, you have different stops. So the traverses were planned to basically stop by at individual craters to get information from that. So all the yellow data points are related to impact craters. The ones down here are related to some highland material that can be sampled, and the green ones are basically different volcanic materials that can be sampled. And finally, up here, this one and this one are related to tectonic features. So this is basically sort of the outline, what you can do, what is the rationale and the thinking about all this. Well, for each landing site, for each point, basically, we have a long list of questions that we would like to answer. Of course, you can also do this in a loop. So if you do that, it would be about 180 kilometers. So it takes you about 22 months if you do that. And so here are just a couple of examples of what the interesting things are. So this is the vent, basically. You see different impact craters that allow us to study the regular structure. This crater here is sort of covered partially with vent material. You see this layering or mass wasting features here. If you go up to the wrinkle ridge, you see again an impact crater with a very unusual central ridge, very young craters, very blocky craters up there. So that's interesting. And then the Bode Sea crater rim itself has a very nice small crater that excavated very, very large blocks, and we can also see different blocks in material in this area. If you look at the color ratio composite, you see differences. So it's not a homogeneous unit. And when you zoom in, for example, if you look at Miriam's work, this area is not particularly rich in plagioclase, but nevertheless, we see differences between these mountains and the mountains down here. So that's somewhere where you can access plagioclase-rich material. Also, the basalts are different in their clinopyroxene composition, and of course, the pyroclastics are also different from the basalts. If you look at the titanium concentration, you see that we have access to high titanium pyroclastics that are actually different between 1 and 3. So that's interesting. And of course, any landing site that has to has to fulfill the science, has also be a safe landing site. So we are landing on this bench basically into semester. And so if you look at the slopes, fairly benign slopes. So even if you drive up to the rim of Bode Sea, you're less than 10 degrees. And also you don't have to worry too much about rock abundance. On the other hand, you can access rocky material in many places. And that brings me to my conclusions that you can read, and I take your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Harry, for a very interesting discussion or presentation of a lot of really interesting things that we can look at around the Rima Bode area.